Thrilled to be joined as always by Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider. And this recruiting segment is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the official recruiting sponsor here at the network. And you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. So, Brian, let's talk recruiting. Number one name at the top of Oregon fans' minds is that man Elijah Rushing, the Arizona decommit. It seems like all the smoke is going towards Oregon. You are hearing or feeling what?
Sounds like you just read my mind. I don't like betting against Dion and recruiting because he is the one albatross in terms of not being personal against him. You just don't know how kids are going to respond to him going after them. Last year, I was at the Under Armour All-American game, and as he normally does, Cormani was the last one out of the locker room before the game, and he came up in the stands where I was sitting, and I know him well, and he's like, Dion, that man calls me every single day. It's just different when Dion calls you, and they just got into the recruitment with him late and they got him. So it's like, I don't know how to grade that, but I've heard Oregon, Colorado. If that changes, so be it. But we've also discussed on this show that the dad has mentioned, hey, we want to go somewhere that's got a chance to win now. Where do you rank Colorado in that?
Not as close as Oregon.
I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm guessing Dion's kid's not necessarily going to be back next year. I don't know. Because they don't need the money. He might come back and just play college and just enjoy the NIL.
Yeah, he could. Yeah, he could.
Because he's the exception to all rules. He's running around with a Rolex on his arm, literally. So the money, don't get me started on that. That was not a good look. But
for those who are unaware, by the way, just real quick, that was what Shedeur Sanders did after a 27-24 win against lowly Arizona State in Tempe. He went and taunted the student section and followed it up by losing to Stanford at home after leading 29-0. So it again is just it's classic Colorado. It's very flashy. It is attention grabbing. They like to celebrate a lot when they win, and that leads to people celebrating when they lose. And that's what makes them such an interesting, and some would say great spectacle in college football, one way or the other.
I'm going to let you just ride with that statement, and I'm going to just stay away from it from there.
Brian's just going to stay away from it there. So, Aydin Breland was a great get for the Ducks, and hopefully the Oregon's able to keep him committed. Getting Rushing would be the second 5-star of the class. There's a couple other 5-stars I want to ask you about. But as Oregon looks ahead to 2024, that'll be the first year they play in the Big Ten. Do you think that's playing a role here in Oregon's recruiting success? Because it's around the same ranking nationally as it was a year ago. But by the time Oregon actually gets into the Big Ten, do you think, competing for a top 10 class every year easily or in a readily available fashion converts to competing for a top 5 class every year? Is there a big bump? I've had some people wanting me to ask you that.
The exact number is a great question. I'll ponder that for a second, but let me frame it in this manner. They're going to be playing a third of their games in the Midwest to East, which they recruit already. Well, now you can say, hey, you're going to be watching us. Your mom and dad might be driving to an away game, but at least you're going to see us. I think it's going to open more doors because they're not going to be the West Coast team anymore, just out in Oregon somewhere. A lot of the fans that watch the game, they just know the Ducks, so they probably don't even know what city they're in. It's Eugene, by the way, in case you're just randomly watching this podcast. And I guarantee you that, there are recruits that don't know which city it's in that are Ducks fans. Recruits, that's a different animal. They're not real good with the logistics of that. But now you're traveling all over the place in areas you recruit. That's going to be beneficial. Even if it's just 1 or 2 kids a year, and we saw this with Breland, what happened to their recruiting ranking when they got the 5-star kid?
Got into the top 10.
What did I tell you a couple of weeks ago? It was going to go into Now, if you add 2, you're on that 5 to 7 range every year. Then it just comes down to some basic luck. Is there a kid that is a Ducks fan from an area like Florida or Texas, or maybe his dad played for you need that extra guy to get into the top 5. It's still hard to beat Georgia, Alabama, Ohio. They have so many easy wins. Because the kid that's 30 minutes away is a Georgia fan and his dad went to it's any idiot can recruit to Georgia. Ducks, it's a little harder, but now that gap is closed. and nobody has more of a budget because of Mr. Nike to go out and recruit. So they should be fine at top 10, barring a very unusual year. They should be top 10. I would think 4 out of 5 years, in at least 1 out of 5, top 5.
Well,
Like
so far the only full recruiting cycle we've seen from Lanning and the staff is a top 10 class. So that's clearly the standard. And if you continue winning at a high level and start to make some, marquee performances out there and go make a college football playoff appearance, I think there can certainly be some upside there going to the Big Ten. Another 5-star that was on campus for the Washington State game and was treated to an awesome crowd and a well-played game from the Ducks as well. Not their best game, but a solid victory over Washington State. There's a guy by the name of Jordan Seaton, who is a 5-star 2024 offensive line recruit. A little bit newer on the recruiting radar, at least in my world, but he was on campus last week. You always preach the importance of you got to get a kid on campus. You got to get a kid on campus. You get a kid on campus. Oregon visits, you've noted as well, are different. And when you do it on a game day like that, with that sort of crowd, that's going to make an impression here. So what have you heard? This would be the highest rated recruit on the offensive line for Elite Terry in the 2024 cycle.
I was actually just at IMG last week. They have so many kids. I wasn't there just to see Jordan. They literally have 20 Power 5 kids. I mean, it's absurd. But matter of fact, they probably have a little over that, counting some of the underclassmen who aren't even starting yet. But that's another story. It's incredible. He's a prototypical, hardworking, I want to get better, going to change my life by moving all the way down to South Florida. He's an East Coast kid, and he is a technician. He's got offers from Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia. Everybody wants him. And he's made it clear that his decision would be very late. And he wasn't sure when I talked to him a few weeks back that he didn't know how it would finish in terms of it. Like Florida was one he was talking about and this and that. I didn't even know Oregon, because if I didn't know when he was getting ready to take it, I was standing next to him the other night. He didn't even say anything to him. But like I'd spoken to him like 5 times. I've had enough interviewing him. Oregon's just the latest one. He's one of the hardest kids in the country. Now that LJ McCray has picked Florida, his recruitment might be the most difficult of anybody to pick, because he's got Florida, he's got Oregon, Oklahoma, Bama, Georgia. It's everywhere. But Alabama and those schools haven't had the most recent visit the Ducks have. And he's got probably a better chance to play early. You'd have to answer that better than me. I mean, I don't know how many seniors they got on their tackle depth chart.
Well,
he's definitely a tackle.
Johnny Cornelius is someone who could go to the NFL after the season. I don't know that is a lock. I'd have to double check his eligibility real quick, but I think that if he goes, Josh Connerly is locked into being Cornelius could come back. Don't know if he will. Connerly has to come back because he doesn't have enough. He hasn't spent enough time in college yet. He's got one more season at least before he could go to the NFL. So I think it would depend on what a Johnny Cornelius does as to whether he could play in his first year, because Cornelius has been a really good tackle for the Ducks this season. So is that factoring into his recruitment, you think?
Well, I mean, he's a kid that could play early at a lot of places because he's such a technician. I'm not saying he's fearful of competition, because like Ohio State, Bama, Georgia have been on his list. So, but it can't hurt. And he's open-minded, very intelligent kid. This is not your typical recruit that just gets blown away with bling. Because if that was the case, he's taken a gazillion visits. He'd already be committed somewhere. But the Oregon visit, like I've said, is probably the most unique in all of college football when you do it with game day. I mean, that's got to be impactful. So now that I found that out, I didn't even know he was going to Oregon. I would have said something to him Thursday night. Again, I was standing literally next to him. But I'll have to find out more. And that's a really unique one, because I don't think there's anybody else out that direction that he's really looking at. Oregon might be able to steal one here.
So last thing for you, Brian, is a question that came in from my guy Blazer Duck, a regular question asker. And you can always ask questions, YouTube, Twitter, or join SUBTEXT for priority mailbag access. Oregon's got a pretty loaded class right now. Number 9 in the country in the 24/7 Sports composite rankings. A lot of blue chip players. it's a pretty well-rounded class for the most part. There are a couple spots, there's only one running back, for instance, that could be a position. They're looking at Jason Brown, for instance, and I think that that's a position that they still could definitely go after in this recruiting class. But how many more players realistically can they get? They're going after Elijah Rushing, of course. They're going after Jordan Seaton. Jason Brown is on their radar. Is 3 the number? Are there only going to be 3 more players? Like what do you think is, the maximum number of additional recruits we could see get added to this class?
That is the $1 million question for every school, because in my lifetime, it's always been 25. How many kids you could sign that I've really followed recruiting. They lifted that rule, but you still have 85 for your roster. So the answer for every school is different. Plus you have the portal. The magical, we have no idea what's going to happen on a roster, is the transfer portal. In my opinion, you oversign, kids will leave, and then in the summer you figure it out. It's awkward, but that's just the way it is. If an elite player like the Brown kid wants to come, you got to take him. So I don't really look at it as it's 3, it's 2, it's 1. It could be 5.
Okay.
If Seaton on signing day and you don't expect it, he calls up and says, I'm coming.
You take him.
I mean,
yeah.
I don't know how you can say no in today's world.
Right. And they're at 23 verbal commitments in the 2024 class right now from the high school ranks. And then that doesn't factor in the portal. Oregon is going to lose a good number of players from this year's team, but 23 is still a pretty hefty class right now. I would say no more than 4, but 2 to 3 more is probably the most likely number. That'd be my guess.
I think that's correct, but I'm just talking about in a perfect spiral. If Seaton or somebody like that at the last minute wants to come, there's no way that you want to turn down a potential NFL football player, especially at a critical spot like tackle. I mean, Seaton's a great example of that. But the Ducks are a unique recruiting deal. It's the hardest school in the country to project kids because they do so much out of state, but yet they do a great job of scouting and getting kids on campus. That's a really interesting question, man. Props to him for asking, because I don't know if you can pinpoint it, but I'll go with your 2 or 3 as a minimum. I trust Dan to figure out recruiting. He's proven that before he ever landed in Eugene anyway. But they'll get some more kids, and if they have to, there'll be guys that are leaving in the summer next year.
Well, congrats to Blazer Duck. You have impressed Brian Smith. Not easy. That is not an easy thing to do. He's at FBScout_Florida on Twitter. Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, go Ducks.